You bullshit propagandist. Mike Johnson, you bull faux Christian.
Chris Cuomo took aim at MAGA Mike Johnson, calling him a fake Christian instead of someone who truly lives by the values he claims to represent. It's a point Cuomo has raised more than once, highlighting what he sees as Johnson's hypocrisy and questioning whether his actions match his public image. In this segment, we'll look at Cuomo criticizing Mike Johnson after Johnson labeled Democrats as communists. We'll play the clips, break down what was said, and I'll share my own thoughts on the exchange. This is definitely one you won't want to miss.
Mike Johnson, who rules by the good book, must have skipped a few pages. He says the Pentagon needs $350 gazillion because they need to fight communism on our shores. You bullshit propagandist. Mike Johnson, you bullshit faux Christian. Man, you are not ruling by the good book. You just lied your ass off. This Pentagon gets more money than ever. You wasted it on a foreign war that was never strategically or tactically going to get us where we need to be. And now you're saying they need $350 billion, whatever it is, to fight communism on our shores. Really? I mean, when do the boogeymen stop? When do they start respecting that you're not an idiot? Why don't you just say, to kill Democrats? We want to use the military to kill Democrats. Just say it, Mike. The good book says tell the truth.
Before I get into my thoughts on what Chris Cuomo had to say, I want to first show you a clip from one of Mike Johnson's press conferences. In it, he makes a series of unbelievable claims, including accusing Democrats of being communists. The comments are pretty shocking, so it's worth watching them before we break everything down. Let's take a look.
Put in God We Trust above the rostrum because they wanted to remind everybody who would ever serve in this body in Congress that there is a huge distinction between us and the Soviets' philosophy. Communism, Marxism, socialism, all this begins with the premise that there is no God. It's a totally different philosophy. In our declaration that we just celebrated, 250 years on July 4th, the nation's creed, as you hear me talk about all the time, the second paragraph, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Our rights come from our Creator God. They do not come from the government. The communists believe the opposite. They believe that the government is, the state is God. The state is the one that gives you all your rights. And you know what? The state can also take those rights away. And that's exactly what happens. It's inevitable. Communism and this philosophy has led to the murder of tens of millions of...
Mike Johnson would never want to take away anyone's rights, would he? At least that's the image he tries to project. But then there's Roe versus Wade, which tells a very different story. When you look at Mike Johnson's record, it's hard to ignore the gap between what he says and what his actions have shown.
Alone. It is a nightmare. It is a trail to certain death, okay? And that's why we're speaking in such stark terms, because we need America to wake up. We're not even, look, 35 years ago, Republicans and Democrats in Congress, when I was coming up in, the Reagan years, they were fighting communism on a distant shore. Now it's here. But in Congress, they all agreed on that. They obviously knew that we had to fight communism. And so what they were doing here for domestic policy, that was foreign policy. Domestic policy, they were arguing over, marginal tax rates and the shades of regulation and how large the government should be. There wasn't a huge difference, a chasm between the two parties. Those days are gone. Right now, domestically, we are arguing, we are debating, we are fighting. The election will be over whether we're going to maintain our freedom in a constitutional republic, the greatest experiment in self-governance in the history of the world, the longest surviving constitution on the planet, the nation that everybody wants to emulate, and everybody wants to come here. We have to seal our borders so they won't flood over them. We're the only nation in the world that has that distinction. We're the last great superpower. We are the greatest nation in the history of the world. We are fighting right now in Congress over whether we're going to maintain our status as a constitutional republic or we're going to trade that in, dismantle the foundations, and go down this dark road of death to communism. That is the question on the ballot this fall. Now, DSA published their platform. I hope you're all covering. I hope you're writing in depth about their platform. I read it out at an event a few weeks ago, and they've made an ad mocking me reading their platform. Now, they didn't put the clips with the worst parts of it. Representative Jimenez just told you, Carlos told you that. Well, of course they want to pack the Supreme Court, and they want a unicameral legislature. They want the House to run everything, abolish the Senate, because they believe the House would be run by Marxists, communists. They'll be able to run the table on everything. They want to remove the president. What they also want to do is abolish all borders. They don't want any borders. They want mass amnesty granted to anyone who can come onto our shores without exception, even for terrorists and hardened dangerous criminals. Okay? They don't want prisons. It's in their platform. They want to remove the carceral state, they said. No prisons. They don't want to fund the police. This is not a game. Everybody needs to understand. These crazy little mini Mamdanis who are popping up all around the country, they are a danger to you and your family. This is not a game. If they promise you free stuff, there is far more beneath those promises that even some of these people do not understand themselves. And so we are here as the Republican Party to stand on the founding principles of the greatest nation in the history of the world. It is our duty to do that. And we're doing it on behalf of all of you, even the journalists who don't agree with our policies all the time. You better agree on these principles, because it's what keeps you free. By the way, it's what keeps the press free, okay? This is a...
He also talks about keeping the press free, even though Republicans and Donald Trump have repeatedly called the media the enemy of the people. Funny how that changes when it suits them. All of a sudden, MAGA Mike Johnson wants to act like he's defending the press, saying they need to be protected. Give me a break. That's a level of hypocrisy that's hard to take seriously.
And your family. This is not a game. This is not our father's Democrat Party. We're not arguing over marginal tax rates anymore. We're arguing over whether or not freedom is going to survive. And that's why we're so serious about this. Look, I'm a happy warrior, man. I like to get up and have fun, but this is not a fun time. We're in a war. We're in a philosophical war to save the greatest nation in the history of the world. And we take it very seriously.
There's a lot to unpack from everything Mike Johnson said because so much of it falls apart under even the slightest scrutiny. He likes to talk about how politics was more bipartisan 35 years ago, but the reality is that today's Republican Party has moved further and further to the right, while Democrats have largely shifted toward the center to fill the political space left behind. With Donald Trump leading the party, many of its most extreme voices have become the mainstream. What we're seeing now feels like a modern version of McCarthyism, where political opponents are branded with extreme labels instead of debating real issues. Mike Johnson keeps throwing around accusations of communism, but that playbook is nothing new. He might as well be called MAGA Mike McCarthy. Then he brings up Zoran Mamdani, even though Mamdani has gained attention because many people see him as someone focused on everyday Americans. Along with figures like Bernie Sanders, his popularity comes from talking about issues that affect regular families. They're not calling for the end of democracy or trying to eliminate the presidency or the Senate. They're talking about making healthcare more affordable, helping families with childcare, and making sure people can retire without living in poverty. Meanwhile, Mike Johnson warns that everyone else's policies will take away your rights, yet his own record tells a different story. We already talked about Roe v. Wade, and there are ongoing efforts to cut programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Progressives and democratic socialists argue that government should do more to help working people, while Johnson presents those ideas as dangerous. At the same time, he constantly wraps himself in religion and patriotism, but to many people, that image doesn't match his actions. That's exactly why Chris Cuomo continues calling out what he sees as Johnson's hypocrisy. I've covered Cuomo criticizing Mike Johnson before, and if you haven't seen that video, it's worth checking out after this one. Cuomo makes a strong case that Johnson says one thing while doing another. We also have a clear separation of church and state in the United States, something that often gets overlooked in these debates. America was not founded as a nation where one religion governs everyone, despite what some politicians suggest. That's why Cuomo argues it's important to challenge leaders who use faith as a political shield instead of living by the values they claim to represent. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.